Right, ready when you are, mate.
Well, I've got you down to kick it off.
Yeah. I'm going.
You're listening to Edtech Talks, a practical podcast for the world of EdTech.
Welcome to the Edtech Talks Podcast with me, Chris Melia.
Me, Phil Whitehead.
On this final episode in the series, we are joined all the way from Sydney, Australia by Dr. David Kellermann. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, David.
Thank you very much. And, I'm very welcome to be here. I have to correct you. I am not in Sydney right now. I'm in my lovely hometown of Lura in the Blue Mountains, actually.
Right. But you are based at the university within Sydney, aren't you?
Yes, I'm based at UNSW Sydney, which is University of New South Wales in Sydney. And I do normally travel down the mountain to campus, but I've only been on campus once since the beginning of March now. So working from home as everybody else is. It's the new normal at the moment, and teaching my new engineering class of about 300.
Fantastic. So, we're really lucky that you've been able to join us. Obviously, we're in completely different time zones, very early in the morning for us and kind of just heading into your evening. So we really do appreciate that. Would you be able to introduce yourself for our listeners in terms of your role and the work that you're currently doing, both at your institution and some of the stuff you're doing with Microsoft as well?
Yeah, sure, Chris. So I am a senior lecturer. That means I'm faculty within the School of Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering. I actually did my undergraduate and my PhD in the school that I now work in before a stint over in the UK. I was a research fellow at the University of Nottingham. I came back to Australia. I was in a civil engineering department for a while. And then just about 3 or 4 years ago, I came full circle and ended up being offered a position as lecturer in my alma mater. And so I am a researcher, of course. My research area is in computational mechanics and continuum mechanics, things like carbon fiber reinforced plastics and the simulation of those. And as all academics do, I put on my second hat, which is as a teacher as well. And I deliver large courses such as Engineering Mechanics 1 and the Mechanics of Solids. And I'm a bit unusual in that I intentionally sought after teaching the biggest courses that we have. Most professors, I think, would normally shy away from it and want to teach a small elective with 50 people in it. But I teach classes of 500 and 600 normally. And the reason I do that is for one really simple reason, which is that I believe that students are the biggest asset we have. And the more students I have, the more assets I have, the better my class is going to be, not the worse. So that's kind of what I do.
I think it's a really interesting journey that you've been on, David, in terms of teaching. But one thing I wanted to specifically ask you about was when you started to actually embrace technology in your lectures and your lessons with students, when did you actually start to really engage with technology?
Yeah, I had a particular moment that really stands out to me. And it was when I was in the civil engineering department, not in mechanical engineering. And I walked in to give a lecture with a class that had 550 students in it. And the cohort was so big that the only place where we could fit all of the students was our graduation hall. And the graduation hall fits about 1,000 people. And it's so big that if there's someone in the back row and they ask a question, you're not entirely sure whether they're a person or an exit sign. And it's a pretty massive space. And lecturing in this place, it's obviously too big to have a blackboard. You can't stand in front of a blackboard or a whiteboard. And so you have these giant projectors behind you and a document camera. And most people should know a document camera if they hang around universities. It's pretty much a camera that's pointing downwards at a piece of paper. You write things and it's essentially a video of the back of your hand drawing that's being projected up onto the big screen. And so, I'm in this lecture in the civil engineering department, which is, ranked 13th in the world for civil engineering departments. I'm at one of Australia's top universities. And I just thought, this is totally crazy, right? This is backwards. And at the end of the lecture, the students will put up their hand and they say, oh, can you scan that piece of paper and put it on the learning management system? So I take my pieces of paper, I put them through the photocopier, I email them to myself, I take the documents, I turn them into PDFs, I upload them to the learning management system, and then I pin them into the week. And it was just a ridiculous process. And this is the year 2016. So I gave my first lecture, and it was in the evening, and I packed up my things and I caught the bus into the city because I catch the train home to the mountains. And I went to the Microsoft store and I bought a Surface Book, which has one of the best digital inking experiences that there is. I think there's really great inking from iPad Pro and Surface. I wouldn't touch anything else, to be honest. Yeah. And I just bought it on my own money. And the next lecture I came in, I plugged my laptop in as a external source, and I started solving everything on ink. And I played around with different things. So at first I would ink inside PowerPoint, and then the students would say, oh, can you give us a version of that? So I would save the annotations, I would make a second PDF, and now I had this weird versioning control problem where I had the version of the PDF I gave them before the lecture. They had the version of the PDF that they wrote their notes on. Yeah. And then they had the version of the PDF that I'd written my notes on. We now have 3 versions of the same PDF. And so what I started doing instead was using OneNote. Yeah. And OneNote is part of Office 365 for anyone who doesn't know. And it also happens to be one of the best and most responsive inking platforms that there is. Now, as soon as I started writing on OneNote, I had this thought, which is I don't have to save these OneNote pages and send them to the students. I can literally share my actual notebook as a digital asset, right? As a collaborative document in real time. And that student sitting in the back row right next to their friend, the exit sign, who might be squinting at the screen, could have their laptop open, could have the notebook open, and could be paying attention to me, but be having the screen essentially duplicated in front of them in real time. And what do I do at the end of the lecture? I close the lid of my laptop and I walk out and I'm done. And that process was the beginning of this move towards a native digital system, a collaborative shared platform where students are on the same platform that I am.
That is absolutely fascinating to listen to, and in terms of just like accessibility, there's so many like obvious, brilliant reasons to use digital ink. What I wanted to ask you a little bit was how you then started to use Microsoft Teams as well with the digital inking, because a lot of people from the edtech sector will probably know you from your famous YouTube video that you did, and you spoke specifically about Microsoft Teams. So when did you kind of realize that Microsoft Teams would fit into that ecosystem and kind of have an impact?
Yeah, so it's the perfect question, because what happened with OneNote was I started using a special add-on that they had at the time. They later baked it in automatically, and it's called Class Notebook. Yeah. And back then it was an extension to OneNote that allowed you to create a section for every student and automatically deploy these asynchronous access rights. So what that would mean is that there is a section of the notebook where the students can see what I'm writing, but they can't modify it. There's a section where all of us can write, and there's a section that the student has that I can see, but their peers can't, where they may do things like lab notes or homework or whatever. And as soon as I added them to the notebook, anyone who's taught at university before knows this with large courses, which is that enrollments are not static. They change, and they change a lot for the first 3 weeks of the semester. And when you have a class of 550, the number of changes that you get in the first 3 weeks is in the order of about 30 students who will add, leave the course, and so on. Every time you get an email going, oh, sir, could you please add me to the notebook, and so on. So it was only a few weeks into this journey where I realized I need a solution to this. And I started working with IT, and we've got one particular person in IT, and I'm going to name him Dawesh Chand because he is a superstar at our university. And I worked with Dawesh and I worked with Cam Murray from Microsoft Australia to create a PowerShell script that would automatically synchronize the Azure Active Directory group with the Office 365 group. Now, instead of adding 550 students to the class notebook, I just add an Office 365 group. So I built all of this, and it was running at the beginning of 2017. And 2017 is an important year because around April, I think it was, Microsoft Teams launched, which was, I guess, a kind of a response to Slack, which was this enterprise communication platform where people could chat and work together in that digital environment. So Teams came out, but I already had these PowerShell syncing Azure Active Directory Office 365 groups built. And I'm there using our learning management system, which has this forum, which is like a 20-year-old web page, you know, where you go in and you click and there's a thread and you check to see if somebody replied, and there's no mobile apps or anything. And I thought, hey, this Teams thing would be way better for our communication, and it's on our platform. Our students are already logged into Office because that's where they go to check their email on Outlook. We use Outlook for our university email. I would say most universities in the world use Outlook. And I already have these Office 365 groups. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to shut down the forum and I'm going to create a team and I'm going to add this Office 365 group. And boom, like literally 10 minutes of effort, and I've pulled 500 students into a team. Now, it turns out that I was the first person in the world to do this, to not only to think about using Teams in higher education, but I was the first person to throw that number of people into a single team. And Microsoft were shocked. It was such a wild spike in their telemetry. How come we just got this sudden spike in usage on this particular tenant? That they actually reached out and contacted me about it, and we started working together. So that was the very beginning of my collaboration with the Teams engineers, and it was how I started doing that.
Brilliant, brilliant. And there's one thing that we've noticed with Teams as well, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is it's definitely a person-centered platform. It puts that collaboration at the heart and communication. How important do you believe it is that we foster that sense of community amongst learners? And I'm sure it's something that's more important now than ever, really. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's nothing more important at the moment in education than building learning communities. If we really think about what we lose when we go to online learning and we leave the campus, or we do digital learning, or even in today's age where many students who are coming to campus feel isolated, what we have progressively lost more and more of is community. And actually, there's a framework for this, right? It goes all the way back to the philosopher Dewey, who talked about the community of learning, or the community of the community of inquiry. And it's a Venn diagram that basically says an educational experience is made up of three things, which is a cognitive presence, that is someone who is learning, a teaching presence, which is a person who is responding to the learner, curating their material, guiding them through that process. And the third part is the community, which is a student learning along with other students who can bootstrap their experience. And, you know, I always like to say that the best person to learn something from is a colleague who just figured it out 5 minutes before you. I mean, who in the world better to explain something that you're struggling with, right?
Yeah.
And so we need all of these elements. And there was this big advent back, I guess, around 2010 or 2012 of MOOCs, you know, massively online courses. And they said the university is dead. Everything is going to be about MOOCs. People will just log into free MOOCs. And MOOCs, of course, have been one of the most tremendous failures in the history of education. They are barren wastelands of lack of participation and engagement. And the reason is that of Dewey's three important criteria, the MOOC only has one. It has the cognitive presence, the learner. And it is not an educational experience. It is only a learning experience. And it's no different from me Googling something and watching a YouTube video, really. So community is incredibly important. It's not just important because it physically bootstraps our learning experience, but also because being part of a community and peers is what motivates us to be engaged and to be learners. So I think that's something that we kind of got it for free on campus 20 years ago, right? You had to come to the lecture and write the notes down. And if you missed a week, you had to copy the notes from your friend, and you had to show up in the lab, and you were forced into a community by necessity. But today, we often don't need the community anymore. So we have to go back to basics and think, how do we ensure that we rebuild this fundamental component of an educational experience?
Yeah, it's interesting because we definitely feel like in a number of areas with the academic staff that I work with in a role as a learning technologist, teams came at the right time because the questions I was getting were generally around how do we build this community with students, and there wasn't really anything else that did that. The systems weren't designed around communication and collaboration. And with teams, I think another element of this as well was providing that safe space where they could engage and also build their skills in terms of digital professionalism before they go out into the big world. You know what I mean? In terms of public forums, they've got that private space and we can help them develop those skills in a space that they can relate to as well.
I agree. And there were a couple of things that were happening around that same time, which is students were creating Facebook groups privately amongst the students. So they were actually being good collaborators and good communicators. They were building Google Docs to simultaneously collaborate on documents. They were making WhatsApp groups and so on. Yep. And there were some lecturers who were creating chat forums using gamer platforms like Discord, for example, simply because the platforms were modern. Apps with push notifications and really, really simple stuff where, the ability to be able to pick up your phone, take a photo with your camera of some work that you're stuck on, some maths equations, and hit post. That's something that in 2016 would take about 15 minutes to do using your learning management system and about 5 seconds to do with a really good chat app. And so it wasn't just about bringing that in, but it was about owning that component of the experience. It's about saying, well, yeah, we're going to provide you with modern tools and we're going to provide you with a modern forum and a collaborative experience. And I'm going to make it better for you to post on the team than on the Facebook chat, because when you post on the team, we will reply with an authoritative answer. We will reply with something that's correct. And we will really embrace the way that students actually work, which is sharing and finding past versions of labs and having fun and, sharing memes and GIFs and things like that. So much of that was about taking what the students were already doing and actually owning that and curating that experience.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's helped a lot with your efficiency as a lecturer as well.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And the most important thing, and it's the thing that I will bang on about quite a lot, is about integration. Integration is the most important thing that we have today. It is the green field of education. The killer app, as it were, it was a trend of the previous decade that has run its course, right? There is an app and a program that does every single thing you can imagine, just like the existence of the USB mug warmer, right? There is an app that does everything. But if you try and string your course together with all of these different apps, you will end up with a siloed, frustrating, complex platform, and you will not have a very good data integration. And data is what drives AI and learning analytics as well. So Teams gave us this platform where the students were already on Office. They're already clicking to Office to check their email every day. They're already signed in with an Azure Active Directory identity. They're already using Word to create their lab reports. They're already using Excel to plot their lab results. They're already using PowerPoint to come up with their presentation of their project. And we're already using OneNote Class Notebook to share worked examples as the digital lecture theatre. And now we're using Teams to chat, to communicate, and to curate and share all of those documents. So you get to that point, not only are we providing an integrated experience that's already part of our platform, no new software. But secondly, the students are learning a professional skill, which is collaboration on enterprise class software. So instead of learning how to collaborate in their own way off on the side, or learning how to navigate a learning management system that will be irrelevant the day they graduate, they're learning how to work and communicate on enterprise class collaboration software. And the day they walk out of the university, they're experts at document sharing and meetings and teams and calendar invitations and markup and document versions and all of these other skills that we need to deliver really good graduates with.
Yeah, I'd absolutely have to agree with you, David. I mean, one of the big questions we've had, I work across 2 colleges in like the FE sector, which is just like colleges essentially. And one of the things we've been talking about is like getting students ready for like workplace skills, getting them ready for work experience and placements. And we was just looking at our original VLEs, and this was like last year, maybe 2 years ago. And I'm not saying they weren't fit for purpose, but they weren't fit for getting students ready for a modern day working place. And we found that like Teams just being modular, you can plug in various integrations depending on like what they're going to do in maybe industry, but also what they're going to do in terms of their teaching and learning. Like, you know, we have students using Flipgrid and Wakelet, but then also like tools that they might use in the actual workplace. So we're looking at the engineering industry. They've got like these helmets now and the heads up displays with Teams chats coming through. So what you've just been saying about like getting them ready, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't have to push in order to get those enterprise integrations, because enterprise are doing it, because it's an enterprise platform. And so that comes part and parcel, you know?
Yeah, something that I get a lot of questions about, David, and it was actually came up in a keynote that I did yesterday at another university, is how you engage larger cohorts with Teams. Because I've seen a lot of examples of where Teams has worked really, really well with students kind of up to 100 in groups in number. What's your advice on that in terms of keeping that engagement with a large group?
Yeah, so my biggest team that I've told you about already is a class that I had at the end of last year with 600 students in it. And that was awesome, in my opinion. Now, I don't segment the students into different channels for their tutorial sections, right? Because the first thing people think is, oh, I am going to create a channel for every tutorial section. Well, I've got the advantage here of being a bit ahead of the curve, because that's what I tried 4 years ago in 2017, and I realized it didn't work. The reason it didn't work is that you didn't get critical mass of conversation and engagement happening in these channels because there wasn't enough activity happening. And when a student posts a really great question in their tutorial channel and a tutor goes to a significant amount of effort to write a really great answer, isn't it sad that only the 30 people in that tutorial section get access to that piece of information? And so the thought I had was, I want the fire hose, right? I want everything from every student to just be fire hosing and being in access to everybody. And I'm going to use channels differently, which is that I'm going to use my channels for a topic by topic basis. And then something else that's very important that I did, and we can talk about learning analytics later, which is that I changed my curriculum so that I started and finished every topic perfectly within a 1 week period. So week 1 is going to be about stress and strain. Week 2 is going to be about material modeling. Week 3 is going to be axial loading. Week 4 is going to be about torsional loading, and so on. And so the students are in week 1. It's obvious. It says week 1, stress and strain. They click in that channel and they talk about that topic. And I pin the lecture notes for that topic to that week. And the OneNote class notebook automatically puts its subsection as a notes tab there. And the lecture recording is going to be pinned there. And all of the resources that we need for that week are going to be there in this one channel. So they click in this channel and that's where they're working for the week. Now, if it's week 3 and they're studying for a mid-semester test that's coming and they've got a question about week 1, they go back to week 1 and they post it there. So what we've done is we've taken a lot of information and a lot of posts that are coming from students. We've curated it in a way that is intuitive. It's easier for them to find what they're looking for. It's easier for them to navigate. But at the same time, we've automatically managed to divide all of the conversation by topic. We don't need a tag. We don't need to sort it. When a student asks a question in the week 1 channel, we automatically know it's about stress and strain because it is in that topic. Now, the next thing that I did was, how do we deal with the tutorial sections? Well, actually, it was all the way back in 2017 that I started a project creating a bot on Teams bot framework called Questionbot. And the reason why I called it Question is because we tag the bot, and the idea was that you say, I have a @question, or hey, I'm stuck on @question 3.4, or @question, does anybody know? And so the students are just typing like they normally would, and all they do is put an @ Q and hit spacebar, and it auto-completes question, right? So it's literally easier to tag Questionbot than to type the word question, entry point less than 0. And what the bot does is it looks up which tutorial section that student is in from its database. It looks up who the tutors are who are assigned to that group, and it returns a card and it tags the tutors who are responsible for that student. Now, this tutor then gets a notification on their mobile phone or on their PC. They quickly reply, and the question has been logged by the bot as being like an IT service ticket, right? It's something that has to be attended to. And the service ticket is closed by the tutor or the person who asked the question by marking down what the right answer was, and now we're done. So what we've done is we've made sure that every question has gotten answered, but we've got this bot which is able to automatically direct the question to the right person. Now, here's the really beautiful bit, is that it takes these question and answer pairs and it automatically creates a study guide within that channel where it says, here are the high quality question and answers that have been addressed about this topic. And for the tutor themselves, they've got a dashboard that says, here are the unanswered questions of the students that you are responsible for. So with literally less than 0 effort, and I mean that in the sense that @Q spacebar is less characters to type than the word question, and by using channels, we have created a schema and a way of correctly curating and sorting and organizing all of this material and actually generating something authentically out of the student experience, which is a study guide that is curated by a bot from their own conversation and experience.
I think that's absolutely superb, David. There's a couple of points I want to pick up on. One of them is a thank you. First of all, because what I've just been working with English and maths across both colleges, and we were deciding how to set up our topics. And I decided to do it by week. So hearing you say that then just gave me a big smile on my face, because I thought, yeah, I've chose right here. So we're going to go weekly for our maths and English teams and channels that way. So thank you for that. That makes me feel a lot better. The next thing is the question bot. And I know you've just recently actually given this to the wider education community, and I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that. And as someone like me, for example, where would we actually get started with this question bot in our institutions? Because it is a fantastic tool, and how you've used it's incredible.
Yeah, so Questionbot has been an ongoing project, and I've got an ultimate vision for it where it becomes a one-click deployment. And at the moment, it is a very complex deployment that involves Azure resource groups and other things. But yes, at the beginning of this year, I open sourced Questionbot. It is on the UNSW-EDU GitHub, and it's the QBot project. And that open source code base there is, it's getting close to $250,000 Australian worth of code development there that's available, for free for anybody to fork and develop. Now, that bot is available for an institution to try to implement at the moment. And it is a continuing project of mine to get more and more integration natively into Teams or natively into the architecture, such as, for example, School Data Sync, that can be used to deploy Teams. So, that's an ongoing project, and the bot has a lot of AI integrations as well. And, one thing I didn't mention there is the fact that it uses that knowledge base to train its own artificial intelligence, and it can actually start answering questions on its own and redirecting students to previous threads and, help connect students. But that's an ongoing project. So it's available on GitHub now. There's a few universities have picked it up and implemented it. And it's, for me, a bit of a baby in terms of an exciting way of using AI to actually leverage that thing that I spoke to you about at the beginning, which was the asset of students, right? How can we make the students be the creators of their own material?
Yeah, I want to pick you up a little bit on that, actually. It's a little bit off topic, but where do you think AI is going to go in terms of education, and what kind of impact do you think artificial intelligence in the broader sense will probably have on your lessons and your lectures in the future?
Yeah, I've put a lot of thought into artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks and bots, and the role that they have to play. So there is this, I think, fairly, poorly thought out argument that's been made, which is that AI will replace teachers and AI will replace educators. And people who make these comments like, well, what's the point in having 1,000 lecturers lecturing 1,000 classes on the same thing simultaneously? Why don't we just make one good recording? And the answer is incredibly simple, which is that education is not consumption. You can go to Wikipedia and you can go to YouTube and you can find information about literally any topic in the world and you can learn it yourself. But that's not what an educational experience is. And what AI offers us is this opportunity to do two really wonderful things. The first is that we can automate all of the boring stuff, right? We can spend more time connecting as humans. We can spend more time talking to our students and teaching our students, and less time doing boring things like grading papers and dealing with spreadsheets of marks and, doing all of this other stuff that's not really of high value to the students. The second thing that AI can do is that it's got the ability to take data and to scale experiences to a level that are not possible for one person to do. And I always come back to the example of Mr. Mackenzie's grade 4 classroom with 27 kids sitting cross-legged. He knows every one of those students by name. He knows what their challenges are. He knows that Sally and Johnny shouldn't sit next to each other. And he knows that Jenny needs extra maths homework because she's a whiz. And that teacher knows so much about the students, and he delivers a personalized learning experience for every one of them. And so really what we actually want to do is say, well, that is a beautiful education experience. How can I, as a lecturer with a class of 600 or maybe with a class of 1,000, scale that experience to 1,000 people? Well, I definitely can't do it using Mr. Mackenzie's strategy. It's cognitively impossible. But when I start bringing in artificial intelligence and bots, and I've got the ability to identify the students who I need to reach out to because they're struggling, or to automatically give just the right homework to the right students because we understand what their abilities are because of a well-designed data schema, or I can use AI and bots to connect different students together who are struggling with the same topics. There are all of these really humanistic things that I can do with AI that scale that experience out to bigger numbers. Now, it's not the MOOC. It's not 100,000 people having a course. There's a limit. And I think the limit's somewhere around 1,000 or 2,000. But the idea is that as a lecturer, I can give this amazing, personalized, tailored experience to 1,000 students, and AI can enable me to do it by A, freeing up time, and B, giving me this superpower of analytics.
Absolutely. I think one thing that our listeners are going to be very envious of right now is that we can actually see you in your home setup, which is really quite impressive. Do you want to talk us through how that came about and how you use that day to day?
So some people listening to this podcast may have seen the video that you mentioned before, which was a keynote I gave in Las Vegas with Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. And we had a live audience of about 40,000 there. But in that talk, I described how I was delivering my educational experience across the Microsoft stack, how I was using AI and bots and artificial, machine learning and all of these other beautiful systems. But back then, we didn't know what COVID-19 was, and we taught on campus, and I had a bunch of different luxuries. One of those luxuries was that every day I gave a lecture, I walked into a $500,000 lecture theatre that was designed to give a fantastic acoustic experience. It was designed with a wraparound seating configuration where everyone could see the screen. It had professionally designed audio, lighting, high-end HD cameras that I would use, professional microphones, all of this setup. They were walking into $500,000 worth of stuff to make the experience engaging and high quality. And then COVID comes along, and all of a sudden we're doing emergency teaching. And what's the first thing that we do, right? We do a Zoom call, right? A big grid of faces, or maybe we do a call where we're sharing our desktop and we're a little talking head with our $25 webcam in the corner. Now, that student is still paying for the same amount for their degree, but all of a sudden, instead of walking into a $500,000 lecture theatre, they're walking into a $25 webcam experience with poor audio, poor video, and the bandwidth of communication has been crushed down to just a skerrick of what it used to be. So I thought, well, what if we kind of went back to basics? What if we said, what are all of the things that we're missing out on? And I had this idea, I'm going to try and build a really great online experience. Now, this is a podcast and you can't see what it is. I'll describe it, but I will post some videos and pictures of this on Twitter and LinkedIn later. I'm just at Dr. Kellermann on Twitter, so you can follow me, or I'm David Kellermann on LinkedIn. I'm not hard to find. So I will share this. But basically what I've set up is a home studio with multiple machines, multiple cameras, and some professional lighting and audio equipment. So firstly, the image you're looking at is not a $25 webcam. It's a $3,500 webcam, which is a Sigma FP full frame camera running as a USB-C device. I'm talking into a Yeticaster microphone. It's the same device, that we're using for our podcast. And I'm standing in front of a Surface Hub 2S. If you don't know what that looks like, you could quickly Google it, Surface Hub 2S. It is a beautiful 50-inch Windows computer that is on a rolling trestle, and it has got an incredible touch and ink screen. And I have this scene set up here where I'm standing in front of my screen, and it's like a blackboard, and I can look at the camera and I can point at my screen and I can ink on my screen and I can gesture and I can give this very personable experience with really nice lighting and audio and a great visual scene with a lot of attention to details. One thing you guys noticed was like the moon lander picture I have behind me and a few things that are just head nods to engineering, and the wallpaper of my computer, which is a picture of our campus. But as I do this, I'm able to look at the students and they can see, I do so much communication with my hands, and I'm able to ink and run through it. And then at the click of a button in my hand, I can switch to being picture-in-picture and screen sharing from this scene. And while I'm screen sharing, I'm also capturing the chat that is occurring because we are talking live in a Teams meeting. And so I flick over, and right now you can see my OneNote class notebook, and I'm solving a problem in the class notebook. And as I do it, one of my students might say something like, oh, shouldn't that be subscript X? And I read it in the chat, and the chat's captured in the video. So if you're watching it after the fact, you can see it. And I'll respond in the audio sense. I'll say, oh, great question there from Max, or maybe one of them will ask a question. They might say, hey, I'm still confused, or what about the caseware? And so they're really engaged. They're watching this great stream. The reception from my students, by the way, has been enormously positive. They've said, oh, this is the best live stream ever. This is the best live lecture I've joined. They really appreciate it. But we've got this fantastic communication that is occurring, and we're also capturing all of that detail for the asynchronous student who is watching after the fact. So I've put this system together. I really think it's, when you look at it, okay, so you're looking at $20,000 of equipment, and some people might go, oh, $20,000, that's so much. But I'm like, excuse me, we have a $100 billion campus, and our students walk into $1 million lecture theaters. Is $20,000 really a lot of money? I mean, that's the fees of like 6 of my 600 students for a start to build that. And so I really think we need to put a long, hard amount of thought into how we curate and how we deliver these online lecture experiences. So this has been a completely new project for me. It's just something I did in the last couple of weeks. I don't really think it was any superhuman amount of effort. It was just trying to put a lot of thought into how can we try and reach parity with that experience that we probably took for granted before.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. Well, if you don't mind, we will retweet a couple of photographs of your setup just for our listeners.
Yes, please do that.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, you mentioned it a little bit in that explanation, was about digital inking and how important you believe digital inking is for teaching, especially remote teaching.
Yeah, so this is something you'll hear me talk about a lot, which is the bandwidth of communication. Now, let's suppose that we are both in a room together and we're talking. Now, there's some things that we know, right? I can see your face and I can hear your voice, and we can both write on a whiteboard at the same time. So we can start addressing some of those in a Teams meeting right now. I can see your webcam, I can hear your voice, and we can share a whiteboard simultaneously. For anybody who doesn't know, an awesome tool in Office and in Teams is you can launch a whiteboard and you can both draw on the canvas at the same time. So you can see we've taken that one extra step with the whiteboard, and we've opened up the bandwidth of communication to include ink. Now, if we were to take a really simple example, like you had an idea for the design of a bracket and you want to explain it to me, and all you've got is your webcam and you're looking at me, you're kind of trying to make shapes with your hand and describe this thing. But if we were there in person, you would grab a piece of paper and you would draw it. And there are so many instances where drawing is the most efficient mode of communication. And certainly we know this is the case with mathematics, but it is also universal, as in we don't have languages of drawing. All humans draw in the same language, which is pictographic. And it's extremely intuitive. So it opens up the bandwidth of communication. Now, digital ink is something that is rising, I guess, back in terms of it being more and more technologically accessible. But I think it's a huge aid to communication. And I've got a lot of other digital ink projects that I'm not going to talk about just yet, but things that I think we can do which are really, really beautiful in terms of opening up that bandwidth of communication. There's other things that we still have limits to, like I can hold an object like my MathWorks MATLAB mug here, which is my favorite mug given to me by the MATLAB team. And I could be talking about the design of this mug and I could just hand it to you if we were in a physical room, but I can't do that right now. So, there is the bandwidth of matter. Star Trek solved that, right, with the transporter, but I can't pass this over to you. And so there's so much that we're missing out on when we get separated. And the questions we need to ask about online engagement are, how do we get back all of that stuff? How do we open the bandwidth back up?
Wow, this has been a really insightful talk, David. Just one more point we want to trouble you for, and is whether you could provide a piece of advice for any educator who is now transitioning some of their traditional delivery online. What would that be?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think at the moment the conversation is more about emergency teaching. It's not about, okay, let's start talking about learning analytics and machine learning that predicts student outcomes and bots and artificial intelligence. Right now, my advice to people who are delivering their courses online or who are pivoting to online teaching is to think about what the core value is and the basics, and make sure you get that right. Make sure that you organize your course digitally in the best way possible. Make sure that if you're using something like Teams, you use channels in the best way possible. We were talking before about how I recommend using channels and aligning them with weeks and topics, and using the channel as a way to sort your material intuitively for the students. Think about the video that I just spoke to you about. Like, if you were in person, you take for granted that you've got this really great in-person experience on the campus. How can you replicate that? Do your students have the ability to reach out to you personally like they would if they bumped into you in the elevator, and different things like that? Really just think about getting the basics and the core experience right.
Right, really sound advice there, David. So you mentioned before where people can find you on Twitter, but do you just want to mention that again?
All right, I am at Dr. Kellermann. That is at DrKellermann. Don't forget the double N. It is a German surname. And I'm David C. Kellermann, I think, on LinkedIn. I'm certainly not very hard to find, and I welcome everyone to connect with me to shoot questions. And my email address is d.kellermann, KELLERMANN, at unsw.edu.au. And I love collaborating with as many people as humanly possible. And although that does get overwhelming at times, I really, really love to help people and hear about their projects in any way possible.
Fantastic. So our Twitter handle is at edtech_talks. You can use the hashtag Edtech Talks when you are tweeting about the podcast. Where can we find you, Phil?
You can find me at Phil Edtech on Twitter and at TeachBlend on YouTube.
Yeah, I am at Chris LearnTech. And just on the conversation of collaboration, the DigiLearn sector community. So if anybody wants to get involved in a broader kind of community around EdTech across HE, FE schools, UCLan has set up the DigiLearn sector community, and you can join that by going to uclan.ac.uk/DigiLearn sector, and we would more than welcome you into that community. If anyone has enjoyed this episode and the rest of the series, because this is the last episode of the series, please do leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It is very much appreciated. Thanks, David, and thanks, Phil.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you very much, David, for your time. That was an absolute fantastic conversation. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Chris and Phil, for having me on. And, thank you for your continued interest in the work I've been doing. And, let's keep fostering a better model of digital education.
You're listening to